That photograph in my first slide is one I took myself when I was on a cycling holiday in the Hebrides a few years ago. It is misty and vague, like my subject matter. And I'm aware that there's always someone in the room that knows more than I do about what I'm talking about, but I may be stating the obvious for quite a few people in the room, so please bear with me. And I'm avoiding the temptation to rewrite my talk in the light of all the papers I've heard today, which crossed my mind earlier. So, first of all, Margaret Kennedy Fraser. Here's a picture of her in a few years before she died in the I think she's on Barra when she's in that picture. Marjory Kennedy Fraser was born in 1857, died in 1930. She was the daughter of a very well-known Scots singer, David Kennedy. He himself came from quite a poor background. There are issues of class and gender in this topic area. I'm not going to explore them, but I'm happy to if you ask questions. He started work as a house painter, but became a precentor in the church, and then gave it all up to be a freelance singer. One of the riskiest career moves then and now. He specialized in singing Scots songs, and he traveled the world doing this for expatriate Scottish communities. Several of his 11 children were professional musicians. In particular, his daughter Margaret was a singer who taught at the Royal Academy of Music and made a few recordings. And her sister Helen and Marjorie herself were both singing pupils of Mathilde Marchesi in Paris. Marjory Kennedy Fraser thought that Marchesi was not analytical enough. From the age of 13, she was her father's official accompanist, and later on she was also her father's business manager. And her memoirs, published in 1927, I think, A Life of Song, describe arduous foreign tours to expatriate communities in South Africa, Australia, Canada, and the USA, often involving travel in terrible conditions in horse-drawn carts over rough landscape with no roads for days to arrive at some isolated place where they would put on a concert of Scottish songs. In the 1890s, she taught singing and piano in Edinburgh, and she studied music at Edinburgh University under Professor Neeks. At that time, she couldn't graduate because she was a woman, but she did all the courses. And she herself gave summer courses at Edinburgh University. In 1904, she became chief music critic for the Edinburgh Evening News, and she did that up until the First World War. The artist John Duncan, a Scottish artist, encouraged her to visit the Hebrides in 1905, and she started collecting traditional songs in Gaelic shortly after that. And she eventually published 5 volumes of Hebridean songs between 1909 and 1929, as well as several smaller collections and single songs. And she wrote them down on pencil and paper first, and then she made cylinder recordings. She wrote the libretto for Granville Bantock's opera The Seal Woman, 1924, which is due to be released on CD later this year by Retrospect Opera. I encourage anyone who is interested in this rather obscure subject area to sign up to support their crowdfunding initiative. With her daughter, Patuffa, that really was her name, Patuffa, who played the harp, she would do concerts of these songs that she collected and arranged. This is actually an agent's promotional leaflet for the two of them, which was distributed in America and dates from about 1916. The picture gives you a fair idea of the atmosphere of the concerts. In 1928, Edinburgh University gave her an honorary degree of Doctor of Music. She wrote her autobiography in 1929, sorry, that was wrong earlier. And when she died in 1930, she bequeathed her entire archive to Edinburgh University. She was also a supporter of women's suffrage. She was, to some degree, a supporter of Scottish nationalism, which was then much more of a sentimental aspiration than it is now. and a local Edinburgh councillor as well. And there's been practically no work on those aspects of her life. And I certainly haven't done any, but it's an area that interests me. Song collecting. She often arranged songs for her father's concerts because he was always running out of repertoire. And she would take previously published Victorian versions of Scottish songs and fix them up a bit and have him sing them. She started studying Gaelic herself and the songs in about 1882 because she was always looking for repertoire. And she gave her first Hebridean recital of songs in 1907, and that was quite a success. So she published a few songs and then decided to start some serious collecting. And she writes about the collecting experience. First of all, for those who are perhaps not as familiar with this part of the world, the Hebridean Islands, outer and inner, are in the top left-hand bit of Scotland, the west, the northwest. The ones in this picture in orange are the outer Hebrides, which is where she did almost all her work. The inner Hebrides include the very large Isle of Skye and some smaller islands, including Egg, where she also recorded some songs as well. Some other recordings were made later by field recordists in Canna, tiny island just above Rum. So, and these are still remote now. I mean, it's a serious journey to get there from anywhere like Edinburgh, let alone the north of England. So that gives you an idea. So she described the recording process, and I've just highlighted the most striking expressions, but you can take in. She underwent hours of semi-starvation, nervous strain, and semi-suffocation from peat smoke in the cottages because they had no chimneys. Tramping in blinding wind and rain, crossing the sea in small boats. And she brought back these songs, and people in Edinburgh said how much of this was genuine. So she took the phonograph with her as a means of securing the tunes more quickly and accurately and giving pleasure to the singers themselves, but also finding proof of the authenticity of the work and her faithfulness to the originals. Her faithfulness to the originals is breathtaking, misleading expression, frankly. She was certainly not faithful to the originals. I'm sorry, there's no doubt about that. She describes the graphophone. She brought with us a small portable recording graphophone with some wax cylinder records. They entertained the people in the islands with the reproduction of their own voices. And she says how important it is to hear the song because the rhythm is lost. I think this point has cropped up already today. And sometimes the singer sings too early before she's singing into the horn and that kind of thing. And they had to put it as evenly as possible on top of a great kist, a chest. It was fine when it went well, but the notation of the song was another matter. And we've already seen the problems that can arise with pitch here. This one, yeah. She recorded 2 or 3 little tunes on one cylinder. These songs are often quite long, but she just wanted a couple of verses of each one. And you had to play it back to the listening locals before you could do another one. And they got very excited. She also says that the air was so damp, moisture-laden, that the graphophone was likely to go out of order. And sometimes it would just stop. She said it was small and unreliable, but you couldn't carry anything heavier across the landscape, and it caricatured the voices and rendered all the songs with an old man's wheeze, whence its nickname amongst the young lads was the bodach, the old man. And she describes how in the post office of one island, they played the songs back to the locals, and suddenly they were massively enthusiastic and they wanted to record themselves. She says, singing into the aluminium bell does not make for ecstatic performance. Did you find? I don't know. I don't like to intrude, but perhaps. And versions of the song recorded were not on the whole so good as those already heard. That's in another session. But the records substantiated the order of my notation of which I had doubts. And the rain was falling down and they had to walk over the hills, and so they got home. Yes, now I'm just going to save that for a moment. So yes, most of the recordings were made in places like the post office in Castle Bay, which is the only town of any size at all on the island of Barra. Sometimes in the house of a fisherman called Gillespie McInnes, or in the minister's house. And I should point out that the Hebridean Islands are both Catholic and Protestant. There are some who are Catholic and some who are Protestant. That created a lot of problems with Sunday observance for the ferry boats that take you around the islands at one time. It's still a bit controversial now. But both, there were Church of Scotland clerics and Catholic clerics who were both very interested in traditional Gaelic song. So she always had a place to go and record. The temperature, I gather, I'm really on the edge of everything I know here, but the temperature conditions is quite critical. If the cylinder, you know this better than I do, is too cold or too warm, it produces a bad result. Now, in the traditional black houses of the north of Scotland, the conditions are surprisingly stable through the year, and the weather in Scotland is completely unpredictable. But inside these little houses, generally speaking, conditions of temperature and humidity are reasonably constant. So that's one plus, as it were. But on the other hand, recording in a crowded post office full of people who are desperate to see what's going on, you can see how the quality might conceivably be affected in that way. There's one small footnote that I just want to mention. She says, in her early recording in Barra, I got so many airs that I misconstrued at first the occasional presence of vocalized introductory bars. So someone would sing a song, but they would introduce it with a little flourish, a sort of little arpeggio or some little figure, and then they would sing the song. And she thought at first these were accidents. And then she realized from experience that they are essential. Now, Marjory Kennedy Fraser was classically trained, and she came to admire Gaelic song because she had been teaching Schubert and Hugo Wolf in her classes at Edinburgh University in the summer. And she realized that you could write a wonderful song using very simple little melodic ideas. And then, mirabile dictu, she saw the same little things in Hebridean songs. And lo and behold, they are now admitted into the canon. It's a little conjuring trick. I'm speaking, this is my own opinion here, okay? But I think that's what she's doing. And she is linking this little vocal flourish before the proper song begins. She's linking it to the 19th century performance practice of preluding. Instrumentalists would improvise a little scale, arpeggio, something like that, as they led into the sonata. Not just pianists, there are preluding exercises written for the French horn. I can't imagine it, but it's true. I think she is placing these songs in a European art tradition by thinking that the prelude is an essential part of the song. That's just an opinion. Now then, with some difficulty, I can show you a silent film of records being made. The process to get this from the National Library of Scotland, who are punctilious in matters of copyright, was considerable, and it involved the exchange of money. But I thought it was worth doing it. So this is a silent film, so there's no sound problem. And I just have to do that. There we are. It's quite short. There you are. Horn, woman staring at it, sticking her face right in it, standing back, sitting down, and she has some sort of technician helping her. I'll just play that again. And you see everything there. there we are. As I say, I don't normally do this sort of work, but I don't think there's very much film like that. And this is amateur film. It's about 15 minutes long altogether. It's typical amateur film, the sort of thing my auntie would have done. You point your camera at a group of people and they stand and look at the camera, you know. Or they go on a little boat trip around Castle Bay Harbour and Barra. And you see the people in their daily lives shifting stuff on carts, stacking peat outside the cottage, all that kind of thing. So there we are. That was the main thing I wanted to show actually here. So you see how simple it was, in fact. Now, she took these songs and arranged them. She did not collect cylinders for any archival purpose at all. She just had them to remind her of the tune, possibly the words, not always the words, and then published her own arrangements, which are still a little bit controversial. Some of the songs she wrote down or recorded in the singing of Frances Tolmie, who was a much older Skye woman who had a huge repertoire and made her own researches in folk song as well, alongside Lucy Broadwood. Marjory Kennedy Fraser said she was proud that Frances Tolmie, the ancient cultured Skye woman, the pioneer Hebridean song collector whose memory I revere, raised her hands and blessed me and my work when we last parted in Dunvegan, Skye. And Tolmie was a considerable notator. She didn't do recordings, but she wrote down a collection of songs that she heard on the Isle of Skye, and her manuscripts are in the National Library of Scotland now, and there are some specimens that are digitised and you can see online. Tolmie was much more conservative as a notator of folk songs. She didn't add things, she didn't rewrite things, and she certainly didn't write piano accompaniments that sounded like, I don't know, weird Celtic music on speed. She was much more conservative, and in terms of words that I've heard today, and I can't remember who now, Tolmie was objective, at least trying to be objective. Marjory Kennedy Fraser had an aim in view, and it was not simply preserving folk songs, it was publishing them and doing concerts. So Tolmie was rather opposed to the misty Celtic twilight revival that aestheticised traditional Gaelic song and the lifestyle. Lots of historical context, many details she gave, and very conservative notation. The arrangements that Marjory Kennedy made, yes, I mentioned this already. She was teaching Hugo Wolf and Schubert, and this was what inspired her to look at Celtic music in terms of motifs. You know, she was quite a Wagnerian in private. So just a couple of things to look at. Here's a typical Celtic revival cover design, Songs of the Hebrides. And this is a very poor quality reproduction, I'm sorry. The Cradle Spell of Dunvegan. Ancient Gaelic words from Neil MacLeod, The Skye Bard. English translation by Kenneth MacLeod, who was a Gaelic poet that she worked with very closely. The Mora Reaper's Song, phonographed, she says, from the singing of Mrs. Malach in Crianlarich, who is a native of North Uist, which is about halfway up the Outer Hebrides. Gaelic words with an English translation. And here, quite interestingly, is another piece of Celtic nonsense called The Vision of Deirdre. Words from a collection by Alexander Carmichael, who was a very important collector in his own right. The tune from Kenneth MacLeod of Egg, arranged for voice and pianoforte. But look at the piano part. This repeated semiquaver figure runs right through the whole thing. And it says, with a soft, thick tone like that of horns. I have absolutely no idea how you do that. I look, any decent pianist is welcome to try and duplicate this, but I have no idea. But this is a statement that we're bringing things into a familiar sound world of art music. You know, these are not the fairy horns. These are not the horns of Elfland. You know, these are orchestral instruments. Her reception of the reception of these arrangements was astonishing. Rutland Boughton said that the songs of the Hebrides were right up there with the Bach 48, the Choral Symphony, and Parsifal. And Ernest Newman, a pretty respectable critic and very influential, said Schubert and Hugo Wolf would have knelt and kissed the hands of the men who conceived the songs. Schubert never wrote a more perfectly satisfying melody than that of the seagull of the land under the waves. The tide did turn. Hugh MacDiarmid was violently opposed to all things fake Celtic like this. Now, I'm going to turn now to Edinburgh University. And I'm going to begin by saying that I have nothing but the utmost respect and appreciation for library staff in every institution that I have ever worked with and every other similar institution in the entire world. But there are two websites listed at the top of this page. The first one, which I've done a little snip from, is an archival reference, a detail of the entire collection. Due to format, there is no current listening access to the recordings. I don't quite know what that sentence means, because in the second website listed at the top of this slide, they are there. But notice that the web addresses are completely different. And I know I'm just an amateur in this field and everything, but I literally found that website on the train down from Leeds 2 days ago, after spending 6 months, including visiting Edinburgh University archives in person. So I'm quite certain that this is my slow-wittedness, and I'm not used to working in this field. If it had been 19th century printed music, I would be very happy, but anyway. So, what happened was that the cylinders languished in a box, more than 20 boxes, until the 50s, and then some reel-to-reel tape transfers were made. No one actually knows where those tapes are. Everyone, and I have spoken to several individuals, highly placed, everyone thinks, oh, they'll be looked after in ideal archival conditions. I really hope so, but I have no direct proof at all. And one of the chief researchers at Edinburgh University, who's published on Marjory Kennedy Fraser, an American scholar of great repute, she says she's never seen them. So that's a wee bit of a mystery. However, about 10 years ago, they approached Paul at Siren Sound, Paul Turney. Some of you may know him, I don't know. But he runs a company which does very high quality archival work with major institutional libraries. Currently, he's doing a big digitizing program of ancient recordings held in the National Library of Ireland in Dublin. And he traveled up to Edinburgh 3 times. He made a series of transfers. I have the technical information, but if I quoted it, I wouldn't know what I was saying. But he takes a great deal of trouble and care in the detail of this work. At one point, he said he would send me the tapes, send me his own copies, but then he discovered that he had nothing but blank files. And then I found this on Edinburgh University's website, and he heaved a huge sigh of relief because he didn't know what had happened. The collection is about 296 cylinders. Each one gives a sample verse or two of songs, and there are quite often different items on one cylinder, 2 or 3 things on one cylinder. So there's an estimate there's 544 separate items that are recorded. Yeah, Yes, I'll skip that. Yes, Virginia Blankenhorn has done a lot of work here, and she said that there's a problem with identification. They don't have the texts always that go with the tunes. You would need to be fluent in Gaelic, not merely good at it, but really fluent in Gaelic to make out the words of a lot of these recordings. And there's an idea to check the singing of the people she recorded and their families with other people who recorded them later in life. And Virginia Blankenhorn was extremely helpful to me when I asked her a few questions. Here we have some digital transfers. And these are all recorded, put on digital files by Paul Turney. And I just picked a representative sample. Some of the cylinders turn out to be blank. Others are so poor quality that you can't do anything with them at all, usually because they're just far too faint. You know there's something going on, but you know no idea. So here is one of them. Note that is a woman. We've already been around this topic more than once today, but Marjory Kennedy Fraser observed that the women in the outer Hebrides sang at a much lower pitch than the women in the inner Hebrides. I just offer you that for what it's worth. This is another singer without a date, but recorded on the island of, where's it gone? Yeah, the island of Egg. Life in Egg was very hard. Here is Frances Tolmie singing herself, and I've quoted the description. Metadata is obviously a big problem with this, but this is Marjory Kennedy's own description of what is on this cylinder, recorded by Miss Tolmie. And here is a discussion in 1965, recorded by Gaelic speakers who are being played Marjory Kennedy Fraser's cylinders and being asked to identify them. And I think it's really rather wonderful.
She has a good voice. She had a good voice.
What one is it? Can you make out which one it is? Oh, it's not those at the moor, Mama.
Anye.
Was it those she maroon, Mama? No.
No. She had a hound, nicht? She had a hound.
Oh, she maroon, Mama.
Vel
o she maroon, Mama. Akko, vel akko.
Och satt och gå igen. Här kmäll.
Anye, she did it.
Och
Vel versen akko.
Har du inte igen med haven?
Vel akko fick jag.
Har du inte igen med haven?
Du är nog med tjon med.
they basically can't agree. um, I don't know why, but it makes me think of Monty Python. I just think it's extraordinary. And eventually, later on in the clip, it's actually quite long, my guy speaking in English says, "Oh, I realise we've got them in the wrong order," and and everyone laughs, and it sounds extraordinary. I'll just take you a quick tour of some pictures, and then I'll be closed. Yeah, so this is her graphophone, her own graphophone, with her luggage label attached to it. 6 Castle Street in Edinburgh is a reasonably posh address, by the way. It's just off Princess Street. And that's the graphophone. And Edinburgh University got this out to show me a couple of weeks ago, so I'm very grateful. There's some other machinery. Yes, some. You know better than I do what I'm looking at here. But I think that's her graphophone. Yeah, exactly, outside its case. Here are the boxes of cylinders, and you can see they've been wrapped in paper and everything. And she labelled the boxes herself. So that one on the right, Benbecula 1911. Cylinders just to do with Francis Ptolemy are in a special box. There are several boxes like this. Here, there's a blank, there's a scribble, there's some unintelligible writing. Metadata does not get close to the sheer chaos of what she writes on the labels. And there's the graphophone. Here is a nice, the top of a cylinder case, saying that it was recorded in Benbecula. Yes, and this was rather nice. This label she herself has written, Oceanic, good, and it's Bron Bin, which is an Arthurian story in a sort of Gaelic version. Oceanic really goes to the heart of this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but in the 18th century, a man called Macpherson published poems supposedly by a Gaelic bard called Ossian, and he published them in England. They were massively influential. They were an essential part of the Romantic movement. They were fakes. He even back-translated them into Gaelic to make them look more plausible. They're still fakes. But some people held on to this idea of this Oceanic past, and so did Marjory Kennedy Fraser. She hears a song and she thinks it's an oceanic lay, and this is good. Yeah. So it proves, I don't know what, it proves that Ossian really existed. I don't know. It's a great story, by the way. As I've summarised it rather brutally here, but that is it, really. She cuts off his head. Yes, welcome to Scotland. There are later handwritten catalogues which the university staff showed me. These are kind of negatives in some way that I don't fully understand, or carbon copies or something. But someone later tried to write a catalogue of these things. And here is a portrait by John Duncan himself, which is in the National Gallery of Scotland. I've seen it many times. And this is Marjory Kennedy Fraser going off to her for dinner, which I think we all want to do now. So thank you very much. Tapalea.